Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizing committee for this invitation to present here. I must start by saying that this presentation is by no means a comprehensive overview of the field. Both image reconstruction and deep learning are such fast-moving fields that it's really hard to catch up. But what I'll try to do is just to give a very high-level overview of some of the works that we have been doing, as well as some random sampling of the field to fit this talk in 20 minutes. Okay, so this is the first talk in AI, so I get to present the slide. AI has already become a very important tool in our day-to-day life. AI is really good with images. It can do the denoising, in-painting, super resolution, all those sort of stuff really well. AI has also impressed us by generating images based on text prompts. And not only can it generate unrealistic images, it can generate medical images that could be of some use. But however, image generation is not quite the same as image reconstruction. And if you look in the field of image reconstruction, especially in the context of medical imaging, there are not many titles that say AI in image reconstruction, but we are still making use of the terms machine learning or deep learning in image reconstruction. And that's mainly because we know that these tools are different, especially with respect to the level of abstraction that these tools can achieve. So we are very much in the learning phase in image reconstruction, and learning image reconstruction involves forming images from some sort of measurements that involve some sort of sensors and an encoding process. And we are supposed to learn to invert this encoding process to form the representation of the image. So for example, in MRI, the analogy would be that you are given your raw case space data, and then you have to form your image by learning the inverse Fourier transform. And we have already seen evidence that this kind of an inversion mapping can be learned by deep neural networks in a supervised manner. And this has already empowered us quite a bit because we are now ready to make use of deep learning to learn even more complex mapping in data-driven manner. For example, the problems of artifact correction or MRF-style parameter mapping. These are all examples where we have already deployed this deep learning or this black box approach to get very good impressive results already to learn this inversion mappings. However, there are a few things that we don't like about these inversion mapping techniques. First of all, they necessitate a very large network, especially for these cross-domain inversion mappings. There is no spatial linkage between these domains, so we have to rely on a dense network for this kind of learning, which will have billions of parameters to learn, and that needs quite a bit of training data. And even if we do train such a network, it's not going to generalize to almost all the acquisition setting that we want to test it with. Moreover, with this black box approach, we are not really clear on what exactly we are learning. So there is very low interpretability. However, the question is now, how much do we want to rely on deep learning for the purpose of image reconstruction? And especially in MRI, we know that we don't need to learn the Fourier transform from scratch. An analytical memory efficient form is already available to us, and we know that our model-based reconstructions are faithful to the physics to some extent, and they also generalize to a lot of these acquisition settings. But there are a few things that we don't like about the model-based reconstructions. First of all, they are not inherently denoising, so they preserve the noise in the measurements, and they are slow because they are iterative in nature. Moreover, they demand almost fully sampled data, because when we go for undersampled reconstructions, this will result in an ill-posed reconstruction that could have multiple solutions. And then in that case, we will have to rely upon some prior information to guide us to the right solution. And for that, we will have to end up using some kind of regularization functions in our iterative reconstruction. And many times we end up picking one of the regularization functions that are already available to us, such as sparsity, low rank, or smoothness. But in many situations, we don't really know what exactly should be the regularization function that we should be using to solve a problem at hand. So maybe this is one area where we can make use of the power of deep learning. So instead of choosing a priori regularization, we can replace that with a deep neural network and optimize this in an end-to-end fashion and learn the regularization that would best solve that problem. So this was the idea that was proposed in the model approach, where instead of making use of an a priori regularization, we are going to make use of deep learning to learn that regularization further. So to pose this in the most general sense, we introduced a regularization prior as shown here, which is defined as shown here, where we will make use of a deep learning to learn the denoiser such that it gives a residual estimate to minimize this cost function. So how do we train such a denoiser? Well, we can either make use of a pre-training approach or we can make use of end-to-end training. And in end-to-end training, a powerful strategy is to make use of the unrolling approach, where the iterations of a traditional model-based reconstructions are unrolled for the purpose of learning. This was already pioneered by the NYU folks here. The main advantage of this technique is that it adds interpretability to the learning, and we can start to open this black box and try to understand what we are learning. So pick your favorite reconstruction algorithm. So here I'm going to make use of the quadratic penalty approach. And then using an auxiliary variable C, I'm going to split my cost function into two subproblems, one involving an update that makes use of the physics, and another involving an update that makes use of the regularization. And you can already see the parallels with the computer sensing here, because this would be the proximal mapping step here. And usually we will make use of probably an off-the-shelf denoiser like a BM3D or a TV, and then that would be the regular plug and play approach. But here we are going to learn the
We need that final message before you rest. So should be anything.
All right, I think we can try to start back up here. Okay.
A quick round of applause for our patient speaker.
All right, so I think we are talking about unrolling the model approach. So we figured out the two alternating minimization that we have to alternate between, and we draw the schematic of how the k iterations of that unrolled framework is going to look like. And here we are going to replace
My bad, I should have known.
Okay, so we are going to learn that denoiser. Okay. And we are going to replace that with a convolutional neural network, and we just need to learn that weights, but we are also going to impose a constraint that the weights of this neural network are going to be shared across the different iterations. So that means we just have much fewer parameters to learn here. So to train that, we can feed in the noisy data as the input, which could be also the adjoint as the input. And as long as you have access to your ground truth data, you can compute a loss with respect to that and then train this neural network, or the generic denoiser that would be the ideal denoiser to solve that reconstruction problem. So the advantages of this approach is that it's always consistent your measured data. There is no need to force a prior. We just need to learn a very small network with few parameters. So the training data requirements are very modest. It extends to almost all the situations and provides a fast reconstruction. So that was about learning a generic reconstruction prior. But with this unrolled approach, now we can also look at learning very specific priors. For example, here, building upon the total variation approach, we are going to try to learn a nonlinear or a generalized version of this regularization. This was the work explored in the variational net work. Here, they are going to learn new generic filters that could also be combined in a nonlinear manner so that you can get even better performance and a total variation regularization. So this is learned by unrolling the gradient descent algorithm. So the update rules are shown here, and you can see from these update rules that the D and the T transpose would be the filter parameters that needs to be learned, and the H would be the activation functions. So this is what we are explicitly learning in this approach. So these would be the filters and the activation potential. And indeed, the result shows that the learned regularization provides much better results than a handcrafted regularization. Here is another example of learning a low-rank regularization. This was performed in the context of CineMRI, where you have two regularization priors most of the time, a sparsity and a low-rank prior. So in the traditional setting, you would have to manually hand-tune the parameters with respect to both of these regularization. This is going to be a really slow reconstruction. The standard way of solving this is using the ISTA algorithm, which would split this cost function into 4 subproblems. So if we can now unroll it, you can see there will be 4 blocks that we need to learn. And you can see that we are indeed learning the parameters that we are interested in learning, the low rank and the sparse prior related parameters. So once learned, there is no more manual tuning. The reconstruction is fast, and the method gives the best reconstruction compared to any other handcrafted way of reconstructing this. So far we were discussing about learning in the image domain, but we can also learn in the case-space domain. This method, case-space deep learning, makes use of a convolutional neural network in the Fourier domain to learn the case-space interpolation filters. This is not an unrolled approach. They just simply train a pre-trained CNN for the interpolation purpose. And by adding a regrading in between or beforehand, you can extend this to non-Cartesian reconstructions also. And this method, the result shows that indeed very high acceleration factors can be supported by the case-space deep learning approach too. Model muscles is yet another case-space deep learning approach, but here we are again using an unrolled method. This was introduced in the context of phase correction for multi-shot diffusion weighted MRI. In the traditional setting, we would be making use of a structured low-rank matrix completion to interpolate the case-space data associated with each of these shots jointly. But this results in a highly computationally complex algorithm, and it is very slow. So if you want to do the reconstruction for all the diffusion weighted images, it's going to be a really slow process. We can try to interpolate the case-space data using the approach that I previously mentioned by learning the case-space interpolation filters, but that will not be exploiting the low rank property that is shown by these different shots. So if you want to exploit that, we have to learn a multi-channel filter here, and that's what we are going to do in this method. So we are going to replace this prior with a multi-channel convolution learning problem. And again, once we unroll the algorithm, we will see that we are explicitly learning those multi-channel filters. There are very few parameters to learn here. And once learned, this results in a very fast reconstruction that is very useful for reconstructing the multi-shot diffusion data. So again, we are learning in the case-space domain. Now we have the opportunity to learn the best case-space sampling locations also. And this is one of the applications that this deep learning has enabled really well because of its fast inference. So here we want to jointly optimize both the denoiser as well as the case-space sampling locations that will give the best reconstruction prior. And this was what was explored in the J-model work, where we are trying to optimize, again, this problem in an end-to-end fashion using an unrolled optimization. So here we are trying to learn an image reconstruction block that depends upon both the sampling locations as well as the denoiser parameters. So this would be the data consistency block that depends upon the sampling location. And A and A Hermitian also depends on the sampling location, but the denoiser has no dependence on it. And we are going to optimize all these parameters jointly. So here the optimization of a Cartesian trajectory was explored. And it was optimized such that you can sample continuous locations or non-integer sampling locations. And the case-space trajectory was parameterized in terms of the case-space indices. So if you want to optimize it in a 1D manner, you can just optimize for the KY or the phase encoding sampling locations. And if you want to optimize in a 2D manner, you can search for the KX and the KY sampling locations. And indeed, the result shows that the jointly learned sampling trajectory as well as the denoiser gives much better performance than if you were to fix your sampling pattern and just learn the image denoiser alone. There are other methods that have explored this. For example, Lupe is another method that have tried to learn the sampling density. Here they are just drawing the samples from a Bernoulli distribution, again explored for the 2D Cartesian case. And these are the sampling density that they recovered for the various undersampling schemes. Trajectory optimization was also explored for non-Cartesian trajectories, and there are several methods that have followed both unrolled and pre-trained approaches. Many of them differ mainly with respect to the constraints that they applied on the gradient and the slew rate. Some of them also impose additional constraint on the sampling density, and they also differ in terms of how the k-space trajectory is parameterized. So far we were discussing about learning in a supervised manner where there was enough data to do the learning process. And we saw that we can learn nonlinear functions, custom filters, and generic regularization priors, and optimize the sampling trajectory. And we can also get fast inference. So what can we learn if we only have limited data? Again, in traditional model-based settings, we had a lot of learning-based priors where learning was done from the data itself. For example, GRAPPA. In GRAPPA, we used to learn the linear k-space interpolation filters from the auto-calibration lines itself. So as long as we have the auto-calibration lines, can we still do better? Maybe we can learn nonlinear interpolation kernels from these auto-calibration data that would capture the interdependencies between the k-space neighborhoods even better. So this was already explored in a nonlinear GRAPPA approach in 2012. Here, the authors made use of machine learning, where they defined a polynomial kernel in order to capture these nonlinearities. And they showed that indeed the nonlinear GRAPPA performs better than linear GRAPPA at higher acceleration factors. The only problem is that this involved a lot of hand tuning to find out which of the nonlinear coefficients gave the best fit. So if you use all the nonlinear coefficients, it's going to give an overfitted result. But if you don't have enough, you won't get a good performance. But you can now see that this problem can be easily solved using machine learning or deep learning. You can simply replace those with CNNs that you have to learn. And this can be trained just using the auto-calibration line using this loss function. A gradient descent was used, and this is a scan-specific reconstruction. So you don't need a lot of training data. It's just learned from the data itself. And indeed, this mother Raki showed much better performance than GRAPPA at higher acceleration factors. SSDU is another self-supervised approach. Here, they are going to cleverly utilize the available data to do some kind of learning. So in traditional reconstructions, you would be making use of all the available data to compute your loss function and your data consistency. But in SSDU, what they do is, given whatever data you have, you split that into two disjoint sets, set 1 and set 2. And in set 1, you make use of an image reconstruction block along with the coil sensitivity maps and try to estimate or update your k-space samples. And that k-space samples is now compared with the set 2 that was not used here to compute the training loss. And that is used to optimize the parameters of the image reconstruction block. So, and they show that, of course, using this disjoint set approach provides much better results than if you were to use all your data together. There are certain other modalities such as parameter mapping, where even if you don't have ACS data or any other data, you can still do some kind of learning with deep learning. Here, the saving grace is that in many cases, you will have a physical relationship like the Bloch equation or the Bloch-McConnell equation that can generate the signal for you. And in the traditional approaches, we would be using a dictionary learning approach to constrain our reconstruction here. But we know the problems with the dictionary learning. They are very computationally expensive. They can result in very slow reconstructions, and also the discretization controls the accuracy of the reconstruction. But this can be really easily solved using deep learning. And this was the idea that we explored in the Q model work, which was in the context of highly accelerated high resolution diffusion MRI. So here we generated the diffusion signal by simulating it based on a 3-compartment diffusion model. And the simulated data was then fed to a deep neural network to learn a low-dimensional manifold of that signal, which was then used for the undersampled recovery. So if you can devise a joint reconstruction, then this manifold prior can be enforced in every voxel such that this recovery can be done. This idea was also explored in the context of MR spectroscopy, where the FID signals were simulated based on quantum mechanical models, and the low-dimensional manifold was used to constrain the reconstruction of the FIDs, which gives much better spectra as well as the metabolite maps. So dynamic MRI is another application with limited data where it is impossible to get fully sampled data due to the high temporal sampling rate required. But traditional methods have been using the navigator scans associated with these acquisition to learn the priors. One of the earlier learning-based prior methods is the KTPC approach, where they would learn a temporal basis function or the latent representation from the navigator data itself, and then use a linear combination of those latent representations to constrain your reconstruction and remove the temporal aliasing. So we saw that if a linear representation worked, the nonlinear version should work even better. And this was explored in the STORM work, where they tried to make use of the nonlinear latent representations to constrain the reconstruction. But here, you had to explicitly learn that low-dimensional manifold to constrain the reconstruction. And this learning was done using a graph Laplacian approach and a kernel low-rank approach. And then the manifold was used as a prior during the reconstruction. So again, here we see that with machine learning, we can learn the low-dimensional manifold, but we really need a handcrafted mapping to learn that low-dimensional manifold. But with deep learning, now we can think of a reverse approach. So instead of trying to learn the structure of the manifold, we can try to generate, we can repurpose this deep learning to act as a generator that can generate the time series data that lie on this manifold. So this was explored in the generative STORM approach. Here, the goal is to learn the generator G theta that will generate the dynamic time series data that depends upon the manifold based on the latent vectors that are on a low-dimensional manifold. And in order to learn the parameters of the generator, we can impose several constraints, such as you can constrain the Jacobian of the generator to be regularized, or you can even put more constraints on the latent, latent variables also. And this can be trained just from the undersampled data itself, as shown in this approach, that you make use of a progressive in time approach to generate the parameters of the generator as well as the latent vectors. So these are the time series data as well as the latent vectors that were generated using this approach. And the latest trend has been to make use of even more powerful generators for the purpose of image reconstruction. A number of such generative models are now available, some of them requiring a lot of training data and some of them not so much. And the latest trend has been to make use of these score-based diffusion models to generate samples of the data distribution without training data to learn that prior information from. And this has already been applied in the context of accelerated MRI. Here, the score function was learned using a denoising score matching function based on some training data. And once that score network was learned, then it was conditioned on the measured case-based data to generate the accelerated MRI results. Similarly, once that score network is learned, you can also make use of a Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling and generate the data priors. And if you have a likelihood function available, you can also compute the posterior distribution, which will help with the uncertainty estimation also. So with that, I would like to conclude here, where we are at an intersection where the image reconstruction is meeting image generation, which is something that AI has been really good at. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience? If so, please come up to one of the microphones. First of all, I want to thank you for a wonderful overview of image reconstruction. A lot happening in that space, as you say, and it's just impressive how much has happened in the past few years. And also thank you for your patience with our, fire drill here. But Eric, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I just wondered if you could comment in general. You mentioned a lot of examples where the AI amplified reconstructions showed enhanced performance, whether in terms of image quality or in the case of the multi-shot face correction, for example. But as you mentioned, explainability is one of the advantages of the way that you're designing the networks. And did you often get insights as far as what did you learn from what the networks learned as far as what filters it settled on? So the regularization, for example, is something that's, different approaches to regularization occur in the handcrafted sense. What did you learn from what the automated system settled on in that example?
Which one are you talking about?
In other words, when the neural network determined the regularization filter, or and did you sort of inspect it after that and see what was better about it or what was different about it than the handcrafted models?
You can see how the denoiser is performing in those different situations. So you can look at that denoiser output results and get an inference about how that denoiser is performing.
Okay, maybe just one quick follow-up question. On the other example, on the muscles, I guess the diffusion, multi-shot diffusion approach, which also was a better performance than, I guess, some of the other methods of correcting for phase differences between shots. Do you have a sense of where that improvement came from? I mean, was it deriving a phase map in a more with high resolution than the other methods, or in other words, what the network settles on some of these filters and so on, but can you look backward and see what advantage why it conferred that advantage?
So I think when we are learning it in the traditional setting, we have to learn a filter for every diffusion weighted image, right? All those are separate learnings. But here in the training, we are giving all the diffusion weighted images. So I think we are learning a more general filter that is applicable to all the diffusion weighted images. So the next time you can just apply it on the next volume and it works. So it's a more general learning.
On the whole group, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
You go ahead, Dmitry.
Yes, so maybe a follow-up. So you say that you have this constrained spherical convolution type of a model for diffusion, right? A kernel convolved with fiber orientation distribution. How does it constrain your regularization? How exactly you're making use of this functional form?
Oh, okay. So I think in that case, we were just making use of some simulated diffusion signal. So we use that model.
As a library?
As a library, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.